Everyone, and welcome back to Mission 1820 and this week's episode of Have You Ever Wondered? If you're just joining us, we are in a series called Books of the Bible, and we are giving introductions into each book of the Bible in just 5 minutes or less. So without further ado, let's get to this week's book, the second book of Chronicles. This is the 13th book of the Bible. It's also the 9th of the 12 historical books we have been going through that are in the Old Testament. The second book of Chronicles records the history of the southern kingdom of Judah, mainly from the reign of Solomon to the conclusion of the Babylonian exile. And since the book takes mostly a priestly perspective, the northern kingdom of Israel is rarely mentioned because of her false worship and her refusal to acknowledge the temple. The book of 2nd Chronicles can be divided into two main sections. The first being the reign of Solomon. This is covered in chapters 1 through 9, and the section also, well, it really relates the grandeur of Solomon's kingdom, and their primary concern is to describe the construction and the dedication of the temple. This all takes place in the land of Judah, covering around 40 years. The second section is the reigns of the kings of Judah. This is covered in chapters 10 through 36. And this is where you're going to read about the 20 different kings that reigned in Judah during the next 393 years or so. This section is also a history of the Davidic dynasty, and it pays particular attention to the history of temple worship. The book itself was written about 430 BC, and although the author is not stated in the text, Jewish tradition still holds it to be Ezra. Some of the key people you'll read about, well, they're obviously going to include King Solomon. The Queen of Sheba, this is a really cool story in the book. You're going to read about King Hezekiah and King Josiah. Now, these were the only two kings who did right in the eyes of God. Some of the key places are going to include Gibeon. This is where Solomon asked God for his wisdom. Mount Moriah, this is where Solomon built the temple. And Shechem, this is where Solomon's son Rehoboam went to be crowned king over all of Israel. A few key events that you'll read will include Solomon's asking God for wisdom, the building of Solomon's temple, Judah being exiled to Babylon, and then finally the Ark of the Covenant being brought into the temple. Now, the writer's purpose was to reunite the nation around the true worship of God after the captivity, as the post-exilic Jews, they actually needed a reminder of who their God was and how he worked. History, it provided a lesson for them, and the author uses the history of Judah to demonstrate that God blesses his people when they remain faithful in their worship to him. The second book of Chronicles is an amazing read, mainly because it uses such amazing detail in describing the building of the temple in Jerusalem, which, by the way, was the first of two separate temples that were built. The first was built by King Solomon in 960 BC. That was eventually destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar in 586 BC. Now, that temple was rebuilt in 515 BC by Zerubbabel. And the second temple, this was built on orders from Herod the Great around 20 BC, which was ultimately destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. Now, as you read through the second book of Chronicles, you're going to catch a vivid glimpse of Judah's history, as well as the tragic results of their idolatry. So, with that, I hope this introduction is going to get you started in the second book of Chronicles. So God bless, and thanks for watching.